I discovered my husband's secret apartment hidden in a basement storage unit, only to realize he was running an organized scheme to ruin me and leave me facing a huge sentence of debt and public shame. The silence in our apartment used to be comfortable, filled with the hum of the refrigerator and the shared breath of two people building a life. Now it was a suffocating blanket woven from unspoken lies. I remember the exact moment the silence curdled. It was a Tuesday, late afternoon, and the rain was blurring the city lights outside our panoramic window. I was searching for the insurance papers, the ones I knew I had left in the mahogany box in David's study. I found the box unlocked, and the papers weren't there. Instead, nestled beneath a stack of old university textbooks was a jewelry box. Not mine. It was sleek, black velvet, the kind you get from a high-end boutique. My heart didn't just sink, it did a free fall. David was meticulous, almost obsessively organized. He never left anything out of place, especially not something personal. I opened it. Inside wasn't a diamond necklace, which would have been bad enough. It was a simple silver locket, engraved on the back with a single initial, E. Emily, my best friend since kindergarten. The woman who stood next to me when I married David 5 years ago, the godmother to the imaginary children we planned to have. The flood of realization wasn't a slow trickle. It was a tidal wave washing away every memory I held dear. I closed the box, my hands trembling so violently I had to brace them against the desk. I didn't cry. The shock was too profound, too cold. I replaced everything exactly as I found it, smoothing the slight indentation the jewelry box had left on the velvet lining of the textbook stack. I backed out of the study, locking the door with a quiet, almost reverent click, as if sealing a tomb. For the next 3 days, I played the role of the devoted wife perfectly. I cooked his favorite meals, the ones Emily always claimed she could never master. I listened to his rambling workday stories, nodding at the right times, my mind a steel trap, analyzing every micro-expression, every slight hesitation in his voice. I had to know the timeline. I had to understand the depth of the betrayal, not just the act itself. I started reviewing our shared digital life, something I had never done before out of principle. Passwords were easy. David believed strongly in transparency when it came to finances, a concept that now tasted like ash in my mouth. I scrolled through old photo albums, looking for anomalies, moments where Emily's presence had been a little too close, a little too familiar. I found them. The extra texts late at night, the lingering hugs that seemed to last a beat too long at parties, the time David conveniently had to drive Emily home from a work emergency when I was down with the flu. The worst discovery wasn't in the photos, it was in the travel itinerary folder. A flight confirmation for 6 months ago to a small coastal town we had always dreamed of visiting together, David and me. The names on the booking were David and Emily, a 4-day trip. 4 days I had spent believing he was at a dreary industry conference in Cleveland. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark living room, the city lights now seeming judgmental, and I formulated a plan that required absolute stillness, the kind of silence only true desperation can forge. I wasn't interested in shouting matches or throwing plates. I wanted proof, solid, undeniable evidence of the whole sordid affair, from the first stolen glance to the moment they decided our marriage was collateral damage. The next morning, David left for what he called an early meeting. I grabbed my coat, but instead of going to my own office downtown, I drove across town to Emily's apartment building. She lived alone, an aspiring graphic designer with a mountain of student debt and a need for stability I had always felt fiercely protective over. The irony was agonizing. I didn't ring her buzzer. I walked straight to the leasing office, flashing my most convincing, slightly panicked expression. I introduced myself as David's cousin, Maya, claiming I was helping him retrieve some sensitive documents from his old storage unit, which, I explained breathlessly, was located in the basement of this very building. The bewildered manager, more interested in signing off the paperwork than questioning a relative, gave me the temporary access fob. The storage area smelled of damp concrete and forgotten memories. I found Unit 31B easily, Emily's unit, according to the hastily scribbled note the manager had given me, which clearly listed the unit number next to David's name. My blood ran cold. He wasn't just sleeping with her. They were sharing storage space. That suggested permanence, a shared future already being constructed in the shadows. I slid the key card through the reader. The lock clicked open with a heavy, metallic sound. I pushed the door ajar, expecting boxes of old furniture or maybe some festive decorations. What hit me first was the smell, a mix of stale air and something sweetly floral. And then I saw it. It wasn't storage. It was a fully furnished, albeit small, secondary apartment, a meticulously decorated little nest. There was a small kitchenette, a sofa pulled up to a flat-screen TV, and a neatly made bed. But on the small dining table, bathed in the weak light filtering through the tiny window, sat two champagne flutes, one still half full, and beside them a small square jewelry box, identical to the one I'd found in David's study. I moved toward the table, my footsteps silent on the low pile rug. I picked up the second box, my stomach churning, knowing exactly what I was about to confirm. This one was open. Inside, resting on white satin, was a man's wedding band, engraved simply with E and D. And then, from the small bedroom just beyond the living area, I heard a sound. Not a clearing of the throat, not a shifting in bedsheets. It was a distinct, low, almost guttural laugh. David's laugh, followed immediately by Emily's breathless reply. They weren't just here. They were here, right now, likely enjoying the remnants of a celebration. I froze, the wedding band digging into my palm, the sound of their intimate happiness echoing in the small, secret room that was supposed to be my husband's storage. I looked down at the band, then back toward the bedroom door, knowing I had a choice. Confront them in this suffocating little shrine to their betrayal, or retreat and strike later. Before I could move, the bedroom door creaked open an inch, revealing a sliver of light and the shadow of a bare foot stepping into the main room. The bare foot paused, inches from the threshold of the main area. I couldn't breathe, my lungs suddenly forgetting their function. My hand clamped over the wedding band, gripping it so tightly the engraving dug painfully into my skin. Time stretched, viscous and slow, allowing me to catalog every terrifying detail. The silence from the couple in the bedroom, the faint clink of the champagne glass as it settled on the coaster, and the sickening realization that if they were awake, they must have heard me enter. I pressed myself against the cool metal shelving unit near the door, trying to melt into the shadows. The sliver of light from the bedroom door widened fractionally, and I saw a shape emerge. Tall, definitely David's build, but moving with a sluggishness that screamed intimacy. He was scanning the room, his eyes adjusting to the gloom filtering in from the high basement window. "Em, did you hear that?" David's voice was muffled, thick with sleep or perhaps residual celebration. Sounded like the door closing. Emily's voice was softer, laced with a lazy affection that made my vision tunnel. "Probably just the draft, babe. That latch is always sticky. Come back to bed." The foot, which I now recognized as David's, he always kicked off his slippers the moment he got home, wiggled slightly, then retreated back toward the bedroom, followed by the sound of the mattress springs protesting softly. The sliver of light vanished as the door clicked softly shut. Relief, sharp and poisonous, flooded me. They hadn't seen me. They were going back to sleep or perhaps resuming their clandestine mourning, completely oblivious that their secret nest now held a visitor, one armed with damning proof. I slowly, painstakingly maneuvered myself away from the shelving. Every tiny scrape of my shoe sole on the concrete floor sounded like a gunshot in the oppressive quiet. I had the evidence. The second ring, the storage unit rental under both their names, the entire setup. but leaving now felt like fleeing a battlefield before the final shot. I needed to understand the why. I crept toward the small table where the champagne glasses sat. I lifted David's glass, careful not to smudge any potential prints, and sniffed. Faintly, I could smell the sharp, expensive perfume Emily favored, overlaid with the residual scent of cheap motel soap, a scent that often clung to David after his late nights at the office. As I placed the glass down, my gaze fell on a small, leather-bound journal tucked discreetly beneath a stack of takeout menus. It wasn't my style. It was too bohemian, too deliberately unorganized. It had to be Emily's. My fingers trembled again, but this time with a focused, terrifying hunger for knowledge. I flipped it open randomly. The handwriting was looping, energetic, totally unlike my neat script. The entry jumped out at me, dated only 3 weeks ago. He's ready. I know he is. We keep talking about when the time is right, but the time is now. The house is too big for one person, and frankly, Maya deserves to see the real him before she ties her entire future down. He's tired of lying, and honestly, I'm tired of being the mistress. We agreed. Next month, after her promotion party, he'll tell her everything, present the evidence of how unhappy he's been, and then we close this chapter forever. The papers are already drawn up. The papers are already drawn up. My promotion party, next month. The party I'd been planning for 6 weeks, the one David had insisted we host at our home to showcase our success. He wasn't planning to break the news gently. He was planning a public execution of our marriage, using my moment of professional triumph as the stage for his final cowardly act. A low, simmering rage replaced the fear. This wasn't just a fling. This was a meticulously orchestrated demolition project, scheduled to happen in front of my colleagues and family. They had been laughing at me, pitying me in advance, plotting my humiliation while I planned the menu. I carefully tucked the journal into my handbag, the leather cool against my side. I looked back at the bedroom door. They were vulnerable now, caught in the aftermath of their own secret celebration. If I left, they would wake up, realize the storage key was missing, or perhaps notice the slightly ajar door, and they would panic. I needed to ensure they couldn't retreat further into their lie. I backed toward the entrance, ready to slip out, when my phone buzzed violently in my coat pocket. It was a text message from David. I hadn't seen him reply to my earlier benign text about picking up dry cleaning, so this was immediate. It wasn't a text, it was an automatic notification from our joint banking app. Transaction alert. $50,000 wired from joint savings account, Maya and David, to trust account. Attorney R. Sterling. My breath hitched. Sterling was David's divorce attorney, the one he used for his initial separation from his first wife. $50,000. That wasn't for small claims. That was retainer for a full, brutal separation, prepaid and ready to go. And the notification had just come through. Not yesterday, not last week. Now. I stared at the screen, my mind racing through the implications. He hadn't just planned to tell me next month, he had executed the financial groundwork while I was out gathering proof of his infidelity. He was moving faster than the journal suggested. As I spun toward the door, intending to flee this suffocating basement, I heard the distinct sound of the deadbolt on the outside of the storage unit door sliding firmly into place. I hadn't locked it from the outside. The leasing manager had. But now, a heavy, final, metallic thunk echoed through the small space. I rushed to the door, shoving my shoulder against it, but it didn't budge. It was locked from the outside, securely trapping me in their secret apartment just moments before David and Emily woke up to realize their hiding spot had been compromised. The deadbolt. It wasn't the leasing agent. It was a deliberate act, swift and terrifyingly efficient. I hammered my fist against the cold metal, the sound swallowed almost entirely by the thick concrete walls of the basement. Panic flared, hot and sharp, but years of managing high-stakes corporate crises kicked in, sharpening my focus through the adrenaline haze. They hadn't just locked me in, they had locked me in with the evidence of their active preparations. the $50,000 wire transfer, the joint ring, the journal detailing the entire charade, including the planned humiliation at my promotion party. I backed away from the door, my eyes sweeping the room again, searching not for an exit, but for a weapon, a defense, a lever. My gaze landed back on the small kitchenette counter. Next to the half-full champagne flute was a bread knife, the serrated edge glinting faintly under the low ambient light. I snatched it up, the weight surprisingly reassuring. I didn't waste time screaming or shouting. If they were awake, they would hear me, and a confrontation in this tiny, isolated room would only lead to a messy, potentially dangerous escalation. David was calculating, but desperation sometimes made men reckless. I took the small, boxy fire extinguisher mounted near the kitchenette door, a standard safety fixture. It was heavy, solid. I held the knife in my dominant hand and the extinguisher in the other, standing squarely in the center of the room, waiting. If they opened that door, they would find me ready. The silence from the bedroom, however, was beginning to stretch too thin. It had been several minutes since I heard them settle back down. Too quiet. They weren't sleeping. They were listening, just as I had been, holding their breath. I glanced at my phone. Still no service in the windowless basement unit. I had to force a confrontation, but on my terms. I turned my attention to the only external vulnerability, the small, grimy basement window, set high up near the ceiling. It was barely larger than a microwave oven, but perhaps I could use it to signal someone. I hefted the fire extinguisher and brought the base down sharply against the window pane. The glass cracked with a muffled thud, the extinguisher's foam charge absorbing most of the noise. I hit it again, and a spiderweb of fractures appeared. One more solid blow shattered the glass outward. The cold, damp air rushed in, bringing with it the faint sounds of the city above. A distant siren, the rumble of a passing truck. It was my signal. I had created a noticeable breach in their sanctuary. I dropped the extinguisher and grabbed Emily's journal. I used the serrated edge of the bread knife to carefully score the leather spine, then tucked it back under the takeout menus, ensuring it was visible but not immediately obvious. The knife I left tucked into the gap between the countertop and the small refrigerator. I walked back to the locked door. I didn't pound. Instead, I spoke, my voice low, perfectly level, projecting just enough to carry through the thin wood. "David," I said, "I know about Sterling. I know about the $50,000. I also know you plan to announce our separation at my promotion party next month. I'm not going anywhere, and neither is this journal." The silence on the other side shattered instantly. I heard movement, a frantic scuffle followed by David's panicked whisper. "Maya, what are you doing? Let me explain." "Explain what, David?" I continued, louder this time, addressing the room. "Explain the shared ring? Explain why you're funding your new life with my half of our savings? Or perhaps you'd like to explain to the police why you've locked your estranged wife inside an unlicensed secondary residence. Because I've already confirmed the address with the management company, David. I just need to make one quick call." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. Miraculously, despite the thick concrete, the signal flickered to life. 1 bar of 4G, just enough to send a message. I didn't call the police immediately. I called my own attorney, a sharp, shark-like litigator named Marcus I'd secretly consulted after one too many late nights watching documentaries about divorce proceedings. "Marcus, it's Maya. I need an emergency meeting. I'm at an address in the Hawthorne complex. Unit 31B, basement level. I need you to send someone here immediately. And Marcus..." I lowered my voice to a conspiratorial whisper, knowing David was pressing his ear against the wood. "I want every single asset David holds, including that trust fund he set up for his first wife, frozen by the end of the business day. Start with the wire transfer you'll find pending to R. Sterling. Tell them I have irrefutable proof of premeditated financial deception and marital abandonment." I hung up before he could respond, leaving the threat hanging in the air. Then I walked to the broken window, leaned out and shouted upward toward the street level, not caring who heard me. "Security! There's a break-in here, basement unit 31B, call the police!" The door rattled violently as David slammed against it, roaring my name. But it was too late. The spell was broken. He had gambled that I would be too heartbroken or too timid to fight back with evidence. He'd underestimated my clarity under pressure and the meticulous way I'd cataloged our marriage's slow decay. Within 10 minutes, I heard the unmistakable sound of heavy boots thudding down the basement stairs. Not police, but Marcus's private security detail, briefed to treat my call as a potential hostage situation involving significant assets. They bypassed the faulty lock in seconds. When the door burst open, David stumbled back, hands raised defensively, his face a mask of shock and smeared sweat. Emily was behind him, clutching a silk robe around herself, her eyes wide with naked fear. They looked pathetic, caught red-handed in the den of their lies. I stood perfectly still, the bread knife lying casually on the counter beside the journal detailing their plot. I didn't raise my voice. I simply looked at David, then at Emily, a cold, hard finality settling over me. "The house is mine, David. The savings are mine. And you, Emily? You get the luxury of explaining to my attorney why you thought my promotion party was the perfect time for your grand debut. You wanted a life with him? Congratulations. You get his debt, his reputation, and the mess you helped create. I'll be sending you the bill for the broken window." I walked past them, past the shocked faces of the security team, out of the stale air of their secret apartment, and into the clean, bright light of a freedom I had just violently reclaimed. The silence that followed me was no longer comfortable or suffocating. It was the triumphant quiet of a hard-won victory.